there! Before we start this video, I just want to take a quick second to say that the following video contains a lot of opinions about Sonic Colors, and if you are one of those people that don't like having even the slightest bit of scrutiny placed upon something you like, you shouldn't bother with this video. However, if you are curious why somebody might dislike Sonic Colors, or are at least capable to handle criticism like a normal human being, then please stick around. And with that out of the way, let's begin. Alright, I am here with the hottest of takes once more. Sonic Colors is kinda mid. Now, don't click off just yet. I actually genuinely have my reasons. Ask anybody who's been a Sonic fan for longer than 10 years on what the fandom was like when Colors was initially announced, and they'll tell you probably the same thing. It was weirdly positive. Sonic Unleashed was 2 years prior, and ignoring Sonic the Hedgehog 4, Colors was shaping up to be something great. The general consensus of Unleashed was, while the Werehog was weird, the daytime stages are very enjoyable, which is also ignoring the Wii and PS2 version, and the dumbass metal hunting in the HD version. And it was clear that Sonic Team was willing to learn from mistakes. So, while Sonic Team A went to work on their next big project, Sonic Anniversary, Sonic Team B was working on a budget title for the Nintendo Wii to hold people over in 2010. Sonic Colors was announced on May 26th with the CGI teaser of Sonic and Tails running through a forest-like area, quickly followed by the various wisps as they rush off and spell Sonic's name in the sky. And people were quick to notice one very important thing. Sonic's nose was wiggling in the trailer. Jokes aside, Sonic Colors was announced, and when it was released later that year, it was released to positive reviews, complete with the new voice cast featuring Roger Craig Smith as Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic Colors was somewhat, I guess, of a soft reboot of the franchise. The regular Sonic story with some depth was replaced with what the general player would assume what Sonic was back in the 90s. No Gods of Destruction, no storybooks, just Sonic and Tails vs. Eggman, which would be the basis for the next 10 years of Sonic. And that's where the issues begin. Colors was made with children in mind, which, I mean, duh, right? It's Sonic, it's kids' entertainment. But it was also made after listening to feedback from fans. And I put those words in quotation marks because people who wanted Sonic to be a Saturday morning cartoon weren't Sonic fans. Now, I'm not saying that every person who wants Sonic to be Mickey Mouse isn't a Sonic fan. God, no. Sonic fans are diverse to the point it's literal infighting 24/7 over what Sonic should be. You can't mention that you dislike the shade of blue or a logo without being pile-drive nowadays. But it was very obvious, and even more so now, that Colors being a soft reboot was done in response to critics and reviewers mocking the more shonen stories of Sonic past. But that's not actually why I dislike Sonic Colors. I think Sonic as a franchise is perfectly capable of having both lighthearted adventures and more serious storytelling. No, my issue with Colors stems from something deep in its core, something that has since plagued other Sonic games after generations. Something deep and dark, the gameplay. I call Colors a budget title because of the fact it's basically Sonic Unleashed Lite. Unleashed stripped away of anything that made it stand out, and replaced with very cookie-cutter generic platformer gimmicks. But I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to look through Sonic Colors world by world and record every act, and for the sake of my own curiosity, actually see how much of the game is spent in 2D compared to 3D. Because I don't think Sonic Colors is a 3D game. I think it's a 2D game, and not a very good 2D Sonic one at that. And with that absolute hot take, let's actually start the video, and let me tell you just why exactly I think Colors is very, very, very mid. And as a side note, at the end of each world, I'm going to take all my playtime in that specific world and see how much of it is actually spent in 3D compared to 2D. Tropical Resort, some would argue, is a great introduction stage, and at a baseline, I'd agree. However, you immediately get introduced to the game's problems as well. 3D sections are giant empty hallways where at most you'll get to use a wisp, boost, or hit a rail, complete with what is essentially an automated rail section that have plagued modern Sonic games since Unleashed. The 2D sections are objectively more fleshed out, and this is why they're absolutely everywhere. At most for platforming in 3D, you'll see a platform here or there, or a zip line. But it's not very long before you're thrown right back into a 2D arena. Around Act 3 is also the start of what I like to call archaic platforming. Boring slow parts that don't make use of Sonic's signature speed. forcing you to slow down to get through the stage. You'll quickly start to notice that in a lot of these extra acts, you don't actually go through a new stage. You instead have areas of the original act revamped with challenges, using the wisps. It's a very obvious way to pad out the already short Sonic Colors to be just about 2 hours in length gameplay-wise, ignoring story. Worst part is, these stages are mostly entirely in 2D, or have automated 3D sections where you do hardly anything but hold X. However, the boss of Tropical Resort is the first of 2 Ferris wheel bosses, and honestly it's kinda cute. If you use a wisp, you'll do extra damage, and I think that's a good way of rewarding a player for using the game's gimmick to its fullest potential. All in all, Tropical Resort is a pretty good introductory world. However, the further in you go, Sonic Colors already starts showing its tendency to purely rely on 2D sections, and I'll go into detail about why I find this hilarious at the end of the video. But outside of the overuse of 2D being to my dislike, the game does introduce all its main mechanics in 6 acts, and that's really what you would want out of a first world in a video game. So, I spent a total of 8 minutes and 21 seconds in Tropical Resort, and only 1 minute and 59 seconds of that was in full 3D. For reference, I am only counting full control 3D sections, not auto-scrollers or rail grinding sections. Now, on to the Cavity World, which makes me very, very hungry. Sweet Mountain starts off decently well packed, especially compared to Tropical Resort's Act 1. You at least have a split path you can go through, however barely 40 seconds pass and you're immediately thrown into a 2D section, which is about the same as Tropical Resort. Too much of the stage, however, is spent on trying to dodge giant missiles in small hallways. Nothing too impressive. In a decent callback to the classics, you actually start Act 2 where Act 1 left off, so you know, there's some actual classic Sonic representation. However, again, you last in 3D for about 30 seconds before you're thrown into what is essentially a reskin of Savannah Citadel's tree climbing section, or Rooftop Run's clock climbing section. Either or. Act 3 also introduces one of my least favorite wisps, the rocket. Sonic slows down to a stop and you're slowly launched into the air before being rocketed up. You're then forced into a free-falling section that just has no right being repeated this much throughout the game. And immediately in Act 4, we hit another really boring and bland wait and platform stage. You're forced to wait on slow-moving platforms, slow-moving lasers, and stand on buttons to progress through the stage. This is another case of the devs having no idea what Sonic platforming should be like, opting instead to take a really mundane and generic platforming gimmick that really doesn't match well with a hedgehog that's about going fast through a stage. Now, I'm not saying that this isn't a thing that Sonic hasn't had before, even in the classics. I am saying, however, that these parts were weaned off over time and became less and less. So, featuring stop-and-go gameplay like this almost 20 years later is really annoying. To be positive though, Act 5 has these little lollipops that you can homing attack into and you'll be thrown to the next one. That's the kind of platforming that Sonic should have, actual speed based. I like those, and that's a point for colors. Also, a complete side note, but the Ghost Wisp is the most boring shit they tacked on to have a new gimmick to sell for Ultimate. It doesn't even have a Japanese announcement effect for it, or at least it's not working as of September 2022. The boss of Sweet Mountain is the first of 2 ship bosses. You make your way through the ship, hit a lever, and then you're thrown into another platform where you can then hit the boss. Use a wisp for more damage, cute stuff, pretty decent. Sweet Mountain is basically just a continuation of Tropical Resort. Nothing too offensive. I can't commend them for trying to keep going with what they had with Tropical Resort. But sadly, nice things can't last, and the next world has one of the worst opening stages in Sonic's history. I spent a total of 12 minutes and 51 seconds in Sweet Mountain, and 3 minutes and 16 seconds was spent in 3D. So, with the cavities out of the way, it's time for a carnival. And oh boy, do I not like this. Starlight Carnival Act 1 is the worst opening stage in the history of Sonic the Hedgehog. It's all pizzazz and no substance. You're literally thrown into an auto-scroller where Sonic runs by himself for the first 50 seconds of the goddamn stage. You don't even have to do anything. You can literally put the controller down until you're forced to homing attack. You do this and then are thrown into a 2D section before being thrown into another auto-scroller. You're also reintroduced to the Motobugs, which you need to quick step into, which is a cool way to reintroduce an old enemy. 2 minutes and 30 seconds of the stage, and most of it is spent holding X before being introduced to the second worst Wisp in the game, the Cube, which makes Sonic, again, stop to a halt and make specific platforms disappear or reappear, at which point you're rewarded with slow-moving platforms that can crush you, forcing you to slow down before, once again, being thrown into a 3D section that plays itself. It's at this point, I'm starting to be convinced Sonic Team doesn't want you to play Sonic. They want Sonic to do everything and for you to occasionally press X or hold jump. Outside of aesthetics, Act 1 and 2 are the most boring in the game. Act 2 is just a bland, slow, and boring cube spam that lasts 50 seconds too long. Act 3 has the first of the Sky Chase reskins from Sonic 2. You're forced to bounce up and down on a spring and dodge enemies and grab rings. You can hold down the stomp button and you'll go higher. You can press forward and the thing will go slightly faster. And be careful not to hold it down too long or you'll be flung right into an instant death pit. Seriously though, what is it with this game and forcing you to stop? I get that Sonic 1 did it in Marble Zone, but like, everybody fucking hates that. People actively complain about Marble Zone being the worst second zone in the series for coming right after Greeno Zone's more speed-based platforming. But don't worry, I'll get to that one. Ignoring the fact that Act 3 and 4 are both fully 2D stages and boring as all hell, Act 5, once again, throws you into an auto-scroller. And honestly, the more I write about this world, the more I come to absolutely despise it. You're introduced to the Hover Wisp, which lets Sonic float for a bit and use the Lightspeed Dash. It's not the worst, but whatever. Act 5 also has the first bit of actual 3D terrain you don't auto-run on. And at this point, I take what I can fucking get with this goddamn Space Odyssey. It uses the Hover Wisp to try and slowly glide up to the goal ring, and honestly, it's fine, it's boring, but it's fucking something. And then Act 6 is just entirely 2D again because they can't design more than one 3D section per stage. However, it also has specific Lightspeed Dash routes, so you're not just floating from one platform to the next. It's fine, but good god, I want to get out. The boss is just another variant of 3D Sonic bosses that have you running after it and hitting it whenever it decides to slow down. Technically introduced in Sonic Adventure, I'd say it really took its ground with Sonic Heroes with the multiple Egg Falcon bosses and reskins. You get to use the laser to deal more damage, it's pretty alright. I like shooting lasers as much as the next guy, nothing too special. Starlight Carnival might unironically be my least favorite zone or world or whatever in all of Sonic. It is so goddamn lazy that it isn't even funny. You spend so little time actually doing something in 3 in the supposedly 3D game that it's crazy that this is the third world, when even Sweet Mountain still tried to have you actually play the game in 3D somewhat. I spent a total of 12 minutes and 49 seconds in Starlight Carnival, and 1 minute and 39 seconds was spent in 3D. Seriously, fuck the zone, I want to move on. Planet Wisp is arguably the one stage people genuinely remember for its aesthetics and music, and also generations. And admittedly, I can see why. It also starts off with a decent chunk of 3D before reintroducing the spin dash in the form of the Spike Wisp. The Spike Wisp is absolutely fine. It actually adds onto Sonic's moveset without slowing you down to a halt like other Wisps. I genuinely don't have a lot to complain about with Act 1 of Plat Wisp, and I can only repeat Act 2 and Act 3 are fully 2D and it sucks so much before I get annoying. So here, have some footage of a glitch that happened to me that was kind of funny. I'm not showing this to rag on the game or anything, just funny that it happened. I'm using the ultimate version of Colors, if it wasn't obvious, so... You know, admittedly, however, Planet Wisp has the worst case of stop-and-go platforming in the entire game. It often throws you into slow-moving platforms where you have to wait to reach a pull-up or something like that. It offers you the ability to homing attack enemies, but with Sonic's weird jump physics in this game, there's a good chance you'll find yourself careening off to your death. Act 4 decides to throw, again, another reskin of Savannah Citadel in the form of climbing up towards the top of some terraformer mining facility. They don't really explain what the hell it is, so whatever. Also, if anybody ever complains about mysterious floating rails in the sky when it comes to Frontiers, please tell them to shut the fuck up. The Sonic franchise has had mysteriously floating rails since its introduction in SA2. At least have valid criticisms with Sonic Frontiers instead of going, but the rails? Why do I mention that here? Because it became really obvious when I was thinking about it while running through Planet Wisp. Anyway, Planet Wisp's boss is the second Ferris wheel boss, now using the Spike Wisp as the do more damage option. It's okay, it's just a bit more of a souped up version of the original. All in all, Planet Wisp is iconic for a reason, albeit a bit too heavy on the weight for Platform's gimmick, which also kinda infected the Generations version. And I talked about that in my Generations video, which you can watch later. I spent 12 minutes and 19 seconds in Planet Wisp, and 1 minute and 48 seconds was spent in 3D. Now, moving on to a leisurely swim. Aquarium Park is my personal favorite of the tile sets aesthetic-wise. Japanese architecture underwater certainly is up there for interesting Sonic design. And the usual issues arise in this area. Too much reliance on 2D and too little 3D. However, we now get to deal with water, and this is where Colors' horribly strict boost gauge shines through. If you run out of boost while underwater, you're gimped unless you find a drill wisp. The game slows down to a halt, and it's not fun. However, they let you use the drill wisp as a way to traverse water sections, and honestly, it's good! It's a great way to use the wisp gimmick in a Sonic mainstay. Anyway, after that, you're immediately thrown into another fully 2D stage with my two favorite gimmicks, stop and go platforming, and the Cube Wisp. Speaking of lame gimmicks, now, this might just be an issue with the Ultimate version of the game, and I don't remember it being this strict in the Wii version, but Aquarium Park introduces a chase section with some giant crab Batnik, and it's stupidly strict. The game so far has basically told you, if you're in 3D, you should keep holding X in long hallways. Well, throw that out the window, because if you run out of boost in this chase section, you're dead. The game does not throw enough boost at you to facilitate that at the moment. I don't get why they suddenly want to throw actual punishment for holding X to win, but whatever. This chase thing only gets used like twice anyway, and the only time it's a real problem is in its second variant. Aquarium Park also absolutely loves having you use laser in 2D, and admittedly it makes the 2D sections go a bit faster. Oh, and another auto-scroller bounce pad thing, because they were running out of ways to pad out the game. You can really tell that the director of this game only worked on Black Knight and Secret Rings before Colors, because good god, there is a lot of automation in long hallways. But again, we'll get to that. Aquarium Park's boss is a reskin of the ship boss, and it's arguably the worst version. It's souped up where now instead of simply having to get to a lever, you now have to dodge giant missiles and guide small missiles towards a cage to then break it with the tiny missiles, all while underwater. When you eventually get to it, you can use a drill wisp to hit the boss for more damage. It's alright, but a total bore that outstays its welcome for about a minute too long. Not much else to say. I spent 17 minutes and 42 seconds in Aquarium Park, and 2 minutes and 22 seconds in 3D. Anyway, Final World. You're immediately thrown into an auto-scroller, though the stage's theme is a roller coaster, so it's okay this time. You're introduced to the Frenzy Wisp, which is fine. You eat anything you come across and decrease your speed that way, nothing too special nor bad, it's just okay. It doesn't last long enough in most cases to actually be annoying. Act 1, however, is the only act in the entire game that is a majority in 3D. And by god, it's stunning. 2 minutes of full 3D gameplay with only one short section of 2D. Yeah, sure, most of the 3D is very cut and dry, but it's something. And Act 2 picks up where Act 1 leaves off and introduces even more stop-and-go platforming, now with slow, moving platforms that will kill you if you stand in front of them. Standard Final World affair, to be honest. Combining heavy slow platforming with gotta go fast is one way to speed it up, so I can kind of vibe with it. One of the acts is just running around Uranus until you hit a switch. You have to hit Motobugs, it's cute, but just another example of an auto-scroller. Not much else to say about the acts, they're all more or less the same as before. The boss is the second variant of the airship boss, now featuring the rocket wisp to use in 2D when you're near the boss. Same stuff as before, except now you dodge rocks being thrown at you, nothing too special, and I'm just gonna move on to the end. All in all, Asteroid Coaster might be my favorite of the worlds in colors. It's more of the same, except now there's actual 3D sections that last longer than 5 damn seconds. I can't exactly say it's the best in all of Sonic, but it's definitely the best in all of colors. In Asteroid Coaster, I spent a total of 13 minutes and 7 seconds, and 2 minutes and 24 of those were spent in 3D. Now, for the final 2 acts. It's an auto-scroller. It's boring, you hold X to win while dodging the usual chase enemies. Don't mess up during the crab chase though, you'll have to restart right back at the beginning. That's 2 whole ass minutes you lost. Remember how I said that the second crab chase was the worst? Well, here it is. You're not given nearly enough boost to actually escape properly if you don't ration it. Combined with the dodging of Motobugs, you're also not given any warning where the crab is going to shoot when the camera is overhead. So, if you make one bad move because of a misplaced Motobug, get hit, nerd. This is honestly one of the most boring final stages in Sonic's history, which is a shame considering that Unleashed's final stage was notoriously long and boring, and yet featured more to do than in this one. Anyway, whatever. The final boss isn't a supersonic fight, or even a fight where you get some cool all-wisp form. Nah, it's another auto-scroller where you dodge till you can hit the boss 3 times. Music's bumping though. And the wisps being all corrupted and acting as a hazard while trying to get to Eggman is a really cool gimmick. You defeat Exter with the before Eggman is launched into the sky, and if you recognize the death animation from 2 other games, you'd be right, because they reused this exact final boss fight twice in the next 10 years. And considering Sonic Team only released 2 main titles after Sonic Generations, I think you get the point. It's a pretty decent final boss fight for a budget title. Bosses really have never been Sonic's strong suit in 3D, though, looking at Frontiers, I'll save that for later when we get there. It's a cute fight that has Eggman throw all the gimmicks you've used in the game back at you, except for Ghost. They could apparently easily add Ghost as a tacked-on gimmick to most stages, but not add a Ghost phase where you dodge Eggman's tendrils in the right order, or you get hit by a suddenly materializing tendril, or even have Ghost darken the stage and use it alongside Spike or Laser. Seriously, Ghost might be the lamest excuse of an addition to a game I have ever seen. Anyway, I guess Terminal Velocity is the only world where you spend every minute in 3D, so I'll give it that. But for a last act kind of thing, it's kind of lame. I didn't mention the super duper last act where you run from a giant black hole because it's technically not a proper act, so la-di-da. Whew, that was 24 minutes, essentially, of negativity. Sadly, I just genuinely don't have a lot of good things to say about colors. But you might be saying, well, Hedge, why are you hating on my favorite Sonic game? What did it do to you? And well, nothing. I don't like just hating on stuff, but man, the Sonic fan base really just put this game on too much of a pedestal. It's really not that good. In fact, as a 3D game, it's a fucking embarrassment. And that, my dear viewer, is what all of this has led up to. Why I spent all this time dissecting what is essentially Babby's first Sonic game. I am here with the hot take that we shouldn't judge Sonic Colors as a 3D, but instead as a 2D game. Because as a 3D Sonic game, Colors is a fucking joke. As a 2D Sonic game, it's alright. Yes, that's right. I think that Sonic Colors isn't a 3D game. You spend the majority of this game in 2D. Throughout all of this, I counted how much time you actually spend in 3D per world, and it's pretty obvious that most of this game is spent in 2D, which, duh, but if I were to remove all the 3D sections where you actually get to control Sonic and he isn't auto-running, it's really, really obvious that there's even less time where you aren't being flung around and actually get to control the character you're playing. And for that reason, I don't think we should classify Colors as a 3D game. But Hedge, Sega says it's a 3D game! Yeah, and Izuka also says that Mania was made with younger fans in mind, while Forces was made with older fans in mind. I'm just saying, Sega shouldn't be a word of God with how wishy-washy they are. No, but seriously, what makes this game a 3D game? Because it has 3D models? Then Sonic Rush is a 3D game. Is it because you can control Sonic in 3D? You can do that in most of the classics too. In fact, if we consider Colors a 3D game, then literally every 2D game with a behind-the-back camera special stage is a 3D game too.
You can't just say that, Hedge. That doesn't work. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 isn't a 3D game.
Isn't it? You spend a majority of the game's playtime in 2D, but select bits of the game have you in an auto runner looking behind Sonic and dodging by going left, right, and dodging bombs. That is literally the same as Colors. However, if you ignore most of the padding acts, the ones that are just extra wisp challenges with added in boxes in previous areas of the stage, I'd be willing to classify Colors as a 3D game, albeit a very, very short one. But because you need to clear these acts to finish the game, you sadly can't. And for that reason, the game, in its desperation to emulate the classics, falls into the same pitfalls that every other 2D game made after Sonic 3 and Knuckles falls into. Nobody really understands why people loved Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic Mania is the only game in 30 years that feels like an actual good 2D successor to Sonic 3K. Everything you'd expect from Sonic 3K is there and expanded on. Colors gets sorta close, closer than Sonic 4. While not every zone, some acts do lead into each other, but that's a minority. They copied off of Sonic the Hedgehog 1 without looking what works and what didn't. My feelings on the Advance and Rush series is an entirely different video, but despite Colors being a 3D game, it's suffering from the same issues as those games. And that leads me into the director himself. If you have been paying attention to who's been directing the main titles of Sonic games since Generations, you notice the man, the myth, the legend, Morio Kishimoto. If you look him up and see his track record prior to Colors, it begins to make sense why everything he touches is essentially the same. Kishimoto was the lead game designer on Secret Rings and Black Knights, and when you put the 3D sections of Colors, Lost World, and Forces next to those two games, you start to notice patterns. 3D hallways, cinematic sections where at most you dodge or hit something. Now, do I blame Kishimoto for this with Colors? Not really. Colors was meant as a B-tier title, while the big boys worked on the next big title. In fact, it was mentioned they intentionally chose to make this game not another storybook spin-off, meaning that probably at some point in very early pre-development, there was a third storybook game plan before deciding to switch to Unleashed's gameplay style. Kishimoto was thrown out of his comfort zone to direct a whole-ass new main title. Hell, Black Knight was already an insane improvement over Secret Rings, depending on who you asked. And had he been given another game, it probably would have improved over Black Knight again. But now, since Colors was such a hit, it seems that Sega's upper management has decided that Kishimoto is the golden boy and has since put him on every main title in the last 10 years. Mind you, that's only about 3 games, counting Frontiers. But the flaws of his direction become more apparent with Forces, which again is a whole ass other video I could do. Lost World, less so, because again, a whole different playstyle. But all 3 Kishimoto games share the same problems as mentioned before, and Frontiers, despite looking really enjoyable, is falling in the same Kishimoto pitfalls. And that is why I dislike Colors. I think that for 10 years ago, 12, it was fine. It felt like a game that finally had Sega listening to fans, but it got followed up by Generations, which actually built off of what Unleashed did. And thanks to this little mishap, and the subsequent exodus of most of Sonic's team that actually worked on Unleashed and Generations, they have got the wrong people working on the wrong games. If Kishimoto was left to direct spin-offs or budget titles where it's okay to have some more gimmicky and lazy level design, it'd be fine. But the string of mid-games since Generations and the release of Mania really shows that nobody at Sonic Team or Sega really understands what made those specific games work. It's why the CGI teaser for Forces was blatantly lying when it mentioned that the team who worked on Generations was working on Forces. They weren't. They hadn't been working on any Sonic games, but again, an entirely different video. So what am I trying to say with this video? Am I just trying to be quirky and out of the norm? Am I trying to piss people off? Well, not directly, but the point of me talking about this is basically to try and explain why you might find that people dislike Colors. And it's not to shit on people for liking colors. In fact, I'm jealous of people who can still enjoy colors this much. But age and newer games have really shown the cracks in what Sonic Team considers to be the base for Sonic. Sonic Colors was a fine game 12 years ago, but when you compare it to its direct successors or games not made by Sonic Team, it's a really bland game. But you can't deny the impact it had on the franchise. The next 12 years of Sonic, outside of Generations, really were shaped by Colors, from reusing the Wisps to basically releasing what can be considered the Sonic Colors trilogy, featuring Colors, Lost World, and Forces. It'd be a disservice to say that thanks to that, there isn't a sizable group of people who prefer and even grew up with that gameplay style of Sonic. Do I have hope for Frontiers? Well, outside the automation and the reused level layouts, combined with once again just bringing back the Generation stages, I'm excited for Frontiers. I like what I see. The boss fights are actually more than Sonic running after an enemy and hitting it when it's tired. The footage of Sonic bouncing between walls to damage an enemy actually had me excited, just because that's the kind of design we haven't seen in a Sonic game for 10 years. And yeah, the cyber stage design looks to be the usual 3D hallways, but they're reusing level layouts from previous games that will at least provide some decent platforming in 3D. Just goes to show how much art style and design actually matter in making an area feel alive and not just a hallway. So thank you, Sonic Colors. I might dislike you and your horrendously basic 2D gameplay, but you paved the way for the future of Sonic, and for that, I have to be grateful. Only time will tell what Frontiers will do for the franchise. Iizuka wants it to be the stepping stone for the next 20 years like Adventure was. I kind of fear that Frontiers will just be another forgotten chapter of Sonic experimentation, and we're getting another boost game in 2027 when the next mainline title drops for the 36th anniversary. But who knows? I can't tell the future. What I can tell you though is this. Hey, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed making it. In fact, I enjoy everything I do. In fact, everything I do it for you, dear viewer. Anyway, if you would like to see more of my content, you can click on any of the videos that are currently on screen if I can figure out how to do this. Yes, I have recorded a permanent end card because I take my job very seriously. Is this a job? It's not. Anyway, if you like the content, please subscribe, like, comment, ring that bell, hit the yoinky sploinky, all that good stuff. Share it with your friends. Tell me I'm an idiot. Tell me you love me. Or just watch the video, click like, and move on. But seriously, if you could subscribe and press like, that will be appreciated. Anyway, I gotta go, because I'm working already on my next video, and it's gonna be a doozy. Alright, I love you. Bye-bye.